Somerset, September 1816. The test had been the Duke of Ashworth's idea, which meant it had been conceived in the private hours of a man who trusted observation over introduction and had learned, at considerable personal cost, that people perform their best selves in the presence of a title and revealed their actual selves in its absence. His name was Soren Edric Cathmore, the 7th Duke of Ashworth, 31 years of age, unmarried by circumstance rather than by choice, though the distinction had become academic over the past 4 years, as the circumstances had accumulated into something that resembled a choice very closely. He had been engaged once. The engagement had ended in a manner that the county still discussed in the particular hushed register reserved for events that were simultaneously well known and never directly mentioned. The woman had been beautiful and appropriate, and had said everything correctly and had meant almost none of it, and Soren had discovered this 6 weeks before the wedding, in a letter that had not been addressed to him, left open on a writing desk that she had not expected him to visit. The letter had contained 3 things: an endearment to another man, a summary of the Ashworth fortune expressed in terms that made it clear she had conducted a thorough accounting, and a sentence about Soren himself that he had read once and had never repeated to anyone and had carried in his chest like a stone lodged behind the breastbone ever since. He had ended the engagement quietly. He had managed the aftermath with the controlled discipline of a man dismantling something while the county watched, and he had arrived, 4 years later, at a position he had not announced, but had enacted with consistency. He would not be deceived again. He would not offer his name, his title, his estate, and his trust to someone whose behavior in his presence told him nothing about their character in his absence. The test was simple. He would attend the house party at Beresford Hall, not as the Duke of Ashworth, but as Mr. Cathmore, a younger son, a man of no particular consequence, visiting with his brother. His brother, Tobias, who was in fact the younger son, would play no role at all. Tobias would simply be himself, which was a man of 26 with a pronounced limp from a cavalry fall 2 years prior, a gentle disposition that Somerset society found agreeable but unimpressive, and the kind of quiet intelligence that people routinely underestimated because it did not announce itself. The house party had been arranged by Lady Penvale, a woman of 62 who had been managing the social calendar of the western counties for 3 decades, with the serene authority of someone who understood that marriages were too important to be left to the people involved in them. She had written to Soren in August. She had been direct, which he appreciated, and specific, which he respected, and she had mentioned 3 women of suitable family and fortune who would be in attendance, any of whom she had written with the precision of a woman presenting a quarterly report, would be a credit to the Ashworth name. Soren had read the letter twice. He had thought about the 3 women and the house party and the county's patient expectation that he would eventually do what dukes were required to do, which was marry and produce an heir and maintain the estate, and perform the long, quiet work of continuity. He had thought about the stone behind his breastbone. He had written back to Lady Penvale accepting the invitation and requesting, with the careful phrasing of a man who understood that unusual requests required unusually good reasons, that his identity remain undisclosed during the visit. He would attend as Mr. Cathmore. Tobias would attend as himself. Lady Penvale had written back a single line: "I have been discreet about more complicated things than this. You are expected on the 14th. Among the 3 women Lady Penvale had mentioned was one Soren had not heard of, which was itself unusual for a man who had been catalogued by the county since birth. Her name was Jessamine Ellsworth. She was 24. Her father was Cornelius Ellsworth, who had built a textile fortune in the north and had relocated to Somerset 5 years prior with the methodical intention of establishing his family in a county that took establishment seriously. The Ellsworth money was new. The Ellsworth ambition was not new at all. It was simply the first generation to have the resources to act on it. Lady Penvale had described Jessamine as accomplished, direct, and not easily managed, which was either a recommendation or a warning depending on the listener, and Lady Penvale had clearly intended it as both. Soren arrived at Beresford Hall on the afternoon of September the 14th, with Tobias beside him in the carriage and the composed attention of a man who had decided what he was looking for and had designed a method to find it. Tobias, who had been told the plan and had objected to it on 3 separate occasions during the journey, sat across from him with the resigned expression of a younger brother who understood that objecting to Soren's decisions was a form of exercise rather than influence. "You understand," Tobias said as the carriage turned through the Beresford gates, "that this is the behavior of a man who has read too many novels." "I don't read novels," Soren said. "Which is precisely the problem," Tobias said. "If you read novels, you would know that disguises in social settings always collapse, and the collapse is always worse than whatever the disguise was meant to prevent. I am not wearing a disguise. I am simply not correcting an assumption. You are allowing an entire house party to believe you are a second son of no consequence while I, the actual second son of no consequence, stand beside you lending credibility to the deception." "You are lending nothing," Soren said. "You are being yourself. That is the entire point." Tobias looked at him with the particular patience of a man who loved his brother completely and found him, on specific occasions, parsing the word deception with a fineness that bordered on the philosophical. "And what happens," Tobias said, "when you find what you are looking for?" Soren looked out the window at Beresford Hall coming into view through the September trees, the stone front warm in the afternoon light, the grounds arranged with the confident geometry of old money. "Then I will know it is real," he said. Tobias said nothing further. The carriage pulled to the front. They stepped out into the September afternoon, and Soren Cathmore, 7th Duke of Ashworth, walked into Beresford Hall as a man of no particular importance, and found, against the full weight of his expectations, that the world treated him accordingly. She was not what he had expected, which was the first problem. He had expected a woman who was either trying too hard or performing not trying at all, both of which were performances he had learned to identify within 30 seconds of entering a room. Jessamine Ellsworth was doing neither. She was in the drawing room when he and Tobias were shown in. Standing near the window with a cup of tea she appeared to have forgotten she was holding, reading the spines of the books on the nearest shelf, with the automatic attention of someone who catalogued rooms by their contents rather than their furnishings. She wore a dress the color of dark amber, well-made, understated. The kind of thing that communicated means without broadcasting wealth, and her hair was pinned with a simplicity that said she had done it herself and considered the result adequate. Lady Penvale performed the introductions. "Miss Ellsworth, may I present Mr. Tobias Cathmore and his brother, Mr. Cathmore." Jessamine turned from the bookshelf. She looked at Soren first. A brief, direct assessment. The kind of look a person gives when they are forming a preliminary opinion and are not embarrassed about the process. And then at Tobias, and then back at Soren, and said, "Mr. Cathmore, Mr. Tobias Cathmore, you have arrived precisely on time, which either means excellent planning or an indifference to fashionable lateness. I hope it is the latter." "It is the latter," Tobias said before Soren could respond, with the easy warmth that was his natural register and that Soren had always envied without being able to replicate. "My brother considers fashionable lateness a form of dishonesty." "Does he?" Jessamine said, looking at Soren with renewed interest. "And what does your brother consider fashionable punctuality?" "Unnecessary," Soren said. "Punctuality should not require a modifier." She looked at him for a moment. The corner of her mouth moved, not a smile, but the preparation for one that she decided against, which he found more interesting than the smile would have been. "I see," she said. "You are the serious one." She turned to Tobias. "And you are the one who makes the serious one tolerable in company." Tobias laughed. Soren did not, But something shifted behind his expression that Tobias would later describe, when recounting the moment to Lady Penvale's niece over dinner, as the sound of a plan developing its first crack. The house party settled into its rhythm over the course of the afternoon. 12 guests, the Beresford family, Lady Penvale as social architect. Soren watched. This was what he had come to do, and he did it with the focused discipline of a man conducting research. He watched Jessamine with Mrs. Aldwych, who was 50 and kind and had nothing to offer anyone socially, and noted that Jessamine gave her the same quality of attention she gave everyone else. He watched her with Sir Neville Ferris, who was titled and tedious, and noted that she listened to his opinions about horse breeding for 11 minutes before redirecting the conversation with a question so precise that Sir Neville found himself talking about something interesting for the first time in what appeared to be several years. He watched, and he catalogued, and he waited for the thing he was looking for, which was the moment when the performance would surface, the shift in register that would tell him who she was when she believed no one important was watching. It did not come. What came instead was Tobias. Tobias had been moving through the drawing room with his particular way of entering conversations, the slight hesitation at the edge of a group, the careful positioning of his weight to manage the limp, the quiet insertion of himself into a space without requiring the space to rearrange itself for him. Most rooms absorbed Tobias without particular notice. He was pleasant. He was agreeable. He was the kind of man people enjoyed talking to and did not think about afterward, which was a quality that Tobias carried with more grace than most people understood, and more cost than he ever showed. Jessamine noticed the limp before Tobias reached her group. Soren saw her notice it. The brief downward glance, the assessment, and then the thing that made him set down his glass. She moved. Not toward Tobias, not with the conspicuous solicitousness that people sometimes offered and that Tobias quietly despised, but laterally. She shifted her position in the group so that when Tobias arrived, the available space was beside her, and the available space was near a chair, and the chair was positioned so that sitting in it would appear to be a choice rather than a necessity. She had rearranged the room for him without rearranging the room. Tobias joined the group. He stood for a few minutes, then sat, in the chair, the one she had positioned, with the ease of a man who believed the chair had always been there. She did not look at the chair. She did not acknowledge what she had done. She continued the conversation she had been having about the Somerset apple harvest with the focused interest of a woman who found apple harvests genuinely engaging, which, Soren was beginning to suspect, she did. He stood across the drawing room with an untouched glass and thought about the letter on the writing desk 4 years ago, and about the careful architecture of deception that had taught him to look for performance in every room he entered. He thought, "She does not know I am watching." He thought, "She does not know there is anything to perform for." He thought, "She moved a chair." And the stone behind his breastbone, the one he had been carrying for 4 years, shifted, not gone, not dislodged, but moved, like a thing that had been settled and was now being reconsidered. Dinner confirmed what the drawing room had suggested, and complicated what the drawing room had left simple. Jessamine was seated between Sir Neville and Tobias, which was Lady Penvale's arrangement, and was therefore deliberate. Soren was placed across the table and 4 seats down, close enough to observe, far enough to be unable to intervene, which was, he suspected, also deliberate. Tobias was talking about the estate he managed for his brother. For Soren, though of course he did not say this, a small property in Dorset that Soren had given him because Tobias needed something that was his, and because Soren understood that a man with a limp and a gentle disposition and no title needed ground to stand on, quite literally, or the world would decide where to put him. Jessamine listened. She asked questions, not the polite questions that society demanded and that evaporated the moment they were answered, but the specific questions of a woman who understood land and property and the work of making something function. She asked about the soil, she asked about the tenants, she asked about the drainage. And Soren watched Tobias's expression shift from polite engagement to genuine animation, the particular light that came into his brother's face when someone treated his work as work, rather than as a hobby given to a younger son to keep him occupied. And then Mrs. Caldwell, who was seated on Sir Neville's other side, and who had been growing restless since the second course, said something that crossed the table with the specific carrying quality of remarks that are meant to be overheard. Mr. Tobias Cathmore manages an estate? How charming. One does wonder whether the elder brother could not find a steward. The table did not go silent. It did something worse. It continued at a slightly lower volume, the particular social adjustment that allowed everyone to hear what happened next while maintaining the appearance of not listening. Tobias's expression did not change. This was not because he had not heard, or because the remark had not landed, but because Tobias had spent 2 years perfecting the skill of absorbing these moments without visible response, which was a skill Soren admired and hated in equal measure, because his brother should never have needed to develop it. Soren felt the response building in his chest, the precise measured correction he would deliver if he were the Duke of Ashworth, the weight of title and position deployed in defense of the person he loved most in the world. But he was not the Duke of Ashworth tonight. He was Mr. Cathmore, a man of no consequence, and the correction would carry no weight, and he sat with his glass and his useless anonymity and understood, for the first time, the cost of his own test. Jessamine set down her fork. She did it quietly, with the controlled precision of a woman who had decided something and was now going to act on it. And the quietness of the gesture was what made Soren's breath stop, because he recognized the quality. It was the same quality he brought to his own decisions, the stillness before the movement. "Mrs. Caldwell," Jessamine said, and her voice was perfectly pitched, not raised, not lowered, exactly the volume that carried to the necessary ears without performing for the unnecessary ones. "Mr. Tobias Cathmore manages a productive estate with tenants who trust him and land that yields. I have spent the past 20 minutes learning more about practical land management from his conversation than I have learned in 5 years of dinner parties in this county." She paused. The pause was precise. "If you have questions about estate management, I am sure Mr. Cathmore would be generous enough to educate you. He has been generous enough to educate me." She picked up her fork. She returned to her plate. She did not look at Mrs. Caldwell again. She turned to Tobias and said, as though nothing had occurred, "You were telling me about the lime wash for the tenant cottages. You said you had found a local supplier?" And Tobias, who had been sitting in the aftermath of Mrs. Caldwell's remark with the practiced stillness of a man who had learned not to expect defenders, looked at Jessamine Ellsworth with an expression that Soren had never seen on his brother's face. The expression of a man encountering something he had stopped believing existed. Tobias said, "Yes, a quarry near Bridport. The quality is exceptional." And they talked about lime wash, and the table resumed its normal volume. And Mrs. Caldwell found something very interesting about her glass. Soren sat 4 seats away and watched the woman who had just done 3 things simultaneously: defended his brother without making him a project, corrected a cruelty without creating a scene, and returned to the conversation as though dignity were not an event, but a continuous condition. He thought, "I have been asking the wrong question." He thought, "I have been looking for the flaw." He thought, "What if there is no flaw? What if there is just this? A woman who moves chairs and sets down forks and talks about lime wash, and means all of it, and performs none of it." And the stone behind his breastbone shifted again. Not settled, not gone, but moved. The house party was scheduled for 10 days. On the morning of the 3rd day, Jessamine announced at breakfast that she intended to walk the Beresford Estate's lower fields, which had been mentioned the previous evening as suffering from a persistent flooding problem that no one had successfully addressed. Tobias said, I would be glad to join you if you would not mind the company. I have some experience with drainage problems. I would welcome it, she said. Drainage is better assessed by two sets of eyes. She did not invite Soren. She had not, he realized with the specific discomfort of a man accustomed to being the center of any room's gravity, looked at him with particular interest since the first introduction. She had given him exactly the quality of attention one gives a quiet elder brother of no distinguishing features, which was precisely the role he had designed for himself, and was now finding considerably less comfortable than he had anticipated. He followed them anyway. He found them at the edge of the flooded pasture. Jessamine was crouching at the waterline in a dress that was going to be ruined at the hem, examining the soil with her bare hand, and Tobias was beside her, leaning on his walking stick, pointing at the gradient of the field with the focused enthusiasm of a man who had found someone willing to discuss hydrology before lunch. He watched Jessamine steady Tobias's arm when the soft ground shifted under his weaker leg. She did it without looking at him, without pausing the conversation. It was the chair in the drawing room again, the quiet rearrangement. Tobias saw him first. Soren, you have come to inspect the drainage. I have come to take the air, Soren said. Jessamine looked up from the waterline. There was mud on her glove and a streak of it across her left cuff. The air is considerably wetter down here than on the terrace, Mr. Cathmore. You may want to reconsider your route. I have reconsidered it, he said. I find this one more instructive. The corner of her mouth did the thing it had done in the drawing room, the preparation for a smile, decided against, and she returned to the waterline and said to Tobias, The inlet is blocked. The stone culvert has collapsed. That is the source of the flooding. He thought. She has chosen the person in this house party who has the least to offer her and has given him the most. He walked down to the waterline. He crouched beside them. He looked at the collapsed culvert and said, Show me. And Jessamine looked at him properly for the first time since the drawing room, and said, You are interested in drainage, Mr. Cathmore? I am interested, he said, and did not finish the sentence the way he had intended, in understanding what I have been missing. Over the next 3 days, Jessamine Ellsworth dismantled every assumption Soren had brought to Beresford Hall, and she did it without knowing she was dismantling anything, which was the quality that made the dismantling so complete. She organized the repair of the culvert. This was not her estate, not her problem, and no one had asked her to do it. She did it because the problem existed, and she knew how to solve it, and leaving a solvable problem unsolved appeared to be, for Jessamine Ellsworth, a form of moral failure she was not willing to commit. She spoke to Lady Penvale's estate manager on the 4th morning, a man named Grieve who had been managing Beresford land for 22 years and who received the suggestion of a 24-year-old woman from the north with the stiff courtesy of a man who believed his professional territory was being invaded. Jessamine did not argue with him. She did not charm him. She showed him the culvert, walked him to the blockage, and asked him 3 questions about the original drainage design that he could not answer. By the end of the conversation, Grieve was taking notes, and Jessamine was drawing a diagram in the mud with a stick, and the dynamic had shifted from invasion to consultation without either party having to concede anything. Soren watched this from the library window. He had been watching a great deal from windows recently, and had begun to notice that his research methodology, the careful, controlled observation from a position of concealment, was producing results he had not designed the methodology to handle. He watched her work with the tenants who came to clear the culvert on the 5th day. She was in the field with them, not supervising from the bank but working, her sleeves pushed back, her gloves abandoned, directing the stone removal with the specific, competent instructions of a woman who understood what she was asking people to do because she was willing to do it herself. Tobias was beside her through all of it. The transformation in his brother was something Soren observed with a feeling he could not name precisely. Something between gratitude and grief. The recognition that Tobias had been waiting for someone to see him as a full person, and that Soren, who loved him more than anyone, had not been able to provide what a woman he had known for 5 days had provided in an afternoon. It was not romance. Soren was watching for that, with the vigilance of a man who had designed a test and was now terrified it would produce the wrong result. And what he saw between Tobias and Jessamine was not romance, it was recognition. It was the specific quality of attention that one competent person gives another when they discover a shared language. In this case, the language of land, of practical problems, of work that mattered because the work itself mattered, and not because anyone important was watching. On the 6th evening, Lady Penvale found Soren in the library. "You are running out of time," she said. "The house party ends in 4 days. You have spent 6 days watching Miss Ellsworth through windows and across dinner tables and from the edges of fields, and you have learned, I suspect, considerably more than you intended to learn and considerably less than you need to know." He looked at her. "What do I need to know?" "You need to know what she does when she discovers the truth. Because she will discover it. She is not a woman who fails to discover things." She paused. "And you need to consider the possibility that what you have been calling a test, she will call a lie." Soren sat with the sentence Lady Penvale had left behind, which sat in the room like a piece of furniture he was going to have to walk around for the rest of the evening. The rain came on the 7th morning with the committed intensity of a Somerset autumn, the kind of rain that compressed the house party into the interior and created the particular forced intimacy of 12 people who could not go outside and were required to find each other interesting indoors. Jessamine was in the morning room. She had taken the writing desk by the window and was writing a letter to her father with the focused attention of a woman conducting business rather than correspondence. Soren knew this because the letter was covered in numbers, and Jessamine wrote numbers the way other women wrote endearments, with fluency and affection, and no apparent awareness that the activity was unusual. "Mr. Cathmore?" she said without looking up. "You have escaped the drawing room. Sir Neville is discussing the Andalusian bloodline," he said by way of explanation. She looked up, the almost smile again, the one she decided against, the one he had begun to anticipate the way one anticipates a particular phrase in a piece of music. "Sit down, Mr. Cathmore. I will not discuss horse breeding with you." He sat across the desk from her, and they sat in silence for 12 minutes, and the silence was not awkward. It was the specific silence of two people who did not require conversation to justify proximity. She broke it. "May I ask you something, Mr. Cathmore? Your brother manages an estate in Dorset. The estate belongs to someone else. And you, the elder brother. What do you do?" The answer was a dukedom and 12,000 acres, and a title that went back 7 generations, and none of it was available to him in this room. "I manage certain affairs," he said carefully, "for the family." "Certain affairs," she repeated. She looked at him with something that had edges. "You are a man of considerable evasions, Mr. Cathmore. I am a man of considerable privacy." "Privacy and evasion are different things," she said. "I find the distinction worth preserving." He felt the sentence land with the precision of a woman who chose her words the way she chose her actions, deliberately, and with full awareness of their effect. "You are right," he said. "They are different things." She waited. She was giving him the space to say more. It was the same quality she had given Tobias at the dinner table, the quality of attention that did not demand a particular response, but was prepared to receive an honest one. He did not say more. He was not ready. The test, the lie, the thing he had built to protect himself was still standing, and the stone behind his breastbone had shifted again, and each shift was making it harder to breathe and harder to pretend. "I will tell you," he said, "when I am ready." She looked at him for a long moment. "I will hold you to that, Mr. Cathmore." She returned to her numbers. He opened his book. They sat in the morning room for another 40 minutes, and neither of them read a word, and both of them knew it. The 8th day was the day Soren understood that he was no longer conducting a test. It began at breakfast. Jessamine said, "You appear to have a great many opinions about a great many things, Mr. Cathmore, and very few of them seem to be your own. They are always on behalf of someone else, on behalf of the family, on behalf of your brother, on behalf of certain affairs." She paused. "It is the most consistent evasion I have ever encountered." Soren said nothing. There was nothing to say that was not either the truth or a continuation of the lie. The excursion to Wells Cathedral occupied the afternoon. Jessamine walked the nave with Tobias. Soren walked behind them, close enough to hear, distant enough to maintain the pretense of separate interest. Lady Penvale fell into step beside him. "She likes your brother," she said. "She does not like him in the way you are afraid of. She likes him in the way that should concern you far more." He looked at her. "Explain." "She likes him as a person. She respects his competence. She treats him as an equal." Lady Penvale paused. "She will extend the same courtesy to you when she discovers who you are. And then she will withdraw it, because you did not extend it to her. I have been courteous. You have been dishonest. They are not the same thing. She told you so in the morning room." That evening, Jessamine played the piano in the drawing room. She played not for the company, but despite the company, a Beethoven sonata that she performed with the focused intensity of a woman who had been managing other people's expectations all day and was now, for 20 minutes, managing only the music. Tobias sat beside Soren. "You should tell her," Tobias said quietly. "I know. She defended me at dinner. She walked a flooded field with me at 7 in the morning. She asks me about the estate as though it matters, because to her, it does matter." He paused. "She deserves the truth, and you deserve to know what she does with it." "Tomorrow," Soren said. "Tomorrow," Tobias agreed, with the tone of a man who had heard this word before and was not entirely confident in its sincerity. Tomorrow arrived with the specific cruelty of a day that had been appointed for courage and was now requiring it. Soren did not tell her in the morning. He did not tell her at breakfast. He did not tell her during the walk in the garden, because Sir Neville joined uninvited and spent 40 minutes discussing the Andalusian bloodline, while Soren stood beside Jessamine with the truth lodged in his throat like the stone behind his breastbone, and the two obstructions competed for space. He was walking toward the morning room when he heard the voices from the library. The library door was ajar. Inside, Mrs. Caldwell was holding court with Mrs. Fenton and a woman named Miss Hadley, who had been one of the 3 candidates Lady Penvale had originally mentioned, and who had spent the house party watching Jessamine's growing closeness with the Cathmore brothers with the calibrated displeasure of a woman who understood that proximity was a competitive resource. "It is extraordinary," Mrs. Caldwell was saying, "the confidence of it. A textile merchant's daughter advising the Beresford estate manager on drainage." "She has attached herself to the younger Cathmore," Miss Hadley said. "The one with the limp. A second son with no prospects would be grateful for the attention." "Perhaps she has mistaken kindness for consequence," Miss Hadley continued. "It is a common error among people who have not learned to distinguish between the two." Soren stood in the corridor. He stood very still. He felt something shift in his chest that was not the stone. It was something older and hotter and more dangerous. The thing that lived beneath the stone. The thing the stone had been placed there to contain. He was reaching for the library door when he heard her voice. Jessamine was behind him. She had come from the morning room. She had heard enough. He could see it in her expression, which was something stripped back. Something that had edges and heat, and the particular quality of a woman who had spent her life learning to hold her own ground, and had just heard someone try to take it from her in her absence. She looked at him. He looked at her. The corridor was narrow, and Mrs. Caldwell's voice was still audible, and Jessamine stood 4 feet from Soren and said nothing, and her silence was the loudest thing he had ever heard. He opened the library door. He walked in. He did not plan what he said. The planning was finished. The test was finished, because a woman he had been hiding from was standing in a corridor, listening to people discuss whether her kindness to his brother was a form of social climbing, and the disguise that had seemed principled 10 days ago now seemed like the most cowardly thing he had ever done. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said. His voice was not the voice of Mr. Cathmore. It was the voice underneath, the one with 200 years of Somerset in it, the one he had been suppressing for 10 days, and that came back now with the full weight of everything he had inherited and everything he had been refusing to use. Miss Ellsworth identified a drainage failure on this estate that Mr. Grieve had missed for 3 years. She designed a solution, organized the repair, and completed it in 2 days. She required no compensation, no recognition, and no permission. He looked at Mrs. Caldwell with the complete attention, the one that was pure and direct, and carried the specific gravity of a man who had stopped pretending. "My brother is one of the finest men I know. Anyone who describes his company as something a person would need to be grateful for has fundamentally misunderstood what the word consequence means." He paused. "Miss Ellsworth treated my brother as an equal because he is her equal, and she did it when she believed no one of consequence was watching." He looked at Mrs. Caldwell. She was wrong about that. Someone was watching, and what he saw was the most consequential thing he has witnessed in 4 years. Soren turned. Jessamine was in the doorway. She had followed him. She had heard everything. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen before. This was a woman assembling information very quickly and arriving at a conclusion she did not yet want to reach. "Someone of consequence," she said quietly. He met her eyes. 10 days of careful construction were collapsing around him with the slow, structural inevitability of a building that had been built on the wrong foundation. "Jessamine," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. She held up one hand. The gesture was small and precise and absolute. The gesture of a woman who needed to think and was not going to be interrupted while she did it. She turned and walked down the corridor, and her pace was even, and her back was straight, and she did not look back. And Soren stood in the doorway and understood, with the complete clarity of a man watching the most important person he had ever met walk away from him, that the test had produced its final result, and the result was that he had failed it. She did not come to dinner. Lady Penvale reported that Miss Ellsworth had a headache, which was the socially acceptable translation of a woman who did not wish to sit at a table with a man who had spent 10 days lying to her. And Soren sat through 4 courses tasting nothing. Tobias sat beside him. "The hand," he said. She held up her hand. "Yes. That is not a woman who is finished with you, Soren. That is a woman who is thinking. There is a considerable difference." He found her the next morning. She was in the walled garden at the east side of Beresford Hall, sitting on the stone bench beneath the espaliered pear tree, and she was not reading, and she was not writing. She was sitting with her hands in her lap and looking at the wall, and the quality of her stillness told him everything he needed to know about what the last 18 hours had cost her. "Miss Ellsworth," he said from the garden entrance. He used the formal address deliberately. He was not going to presume her name again until she gave him permission. "Your Grace," she said. The title landed like a door closing. "May I sit?" "It is Lady Penvale's garden. You do not require my permission." "I am asking for it anyway." She moved, not much, a shift on the bench that created the minimum space, the precise amount that said you may sit without saying you are welcome. "Your name is Soren Edric Cathmore," she said, "the 7th Duke of Ashworth. 12,000 acres in Somerset. And you came to this house party pretending to be a man of no importance to discover whether a woman would treat you differently without the title." "Yes," he said. "You watched me. For 10 days. You watched me move a chair and set down my fork and fix a culvert and play Beethoven, and all of it was evidence in a test I did not know I was taking." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was deceived," he said. 4 years ago. Completely. By a woman who performed every quality I valued and possessed none of them. And the deception was so thorough that when it ended, I did not trust my own judgment anymore. He looked at her. And what I saw was that there was no performance. There was just you, moving chairs and fixing culverts and defending my brother and writing numbers and playing Beethoven. And every day I watched, the test became less about you and more about me, and by the time I understood that, I was too deep into the lie to find a clean way out of it. She was quiet for a long time. A blackbird was singing somewhere beyond the wall. You defended me, she said. In the library. You used your real voice. Yes. Why then? Why not continue the test? Because Mrs. Caldwell called your kindness to Tobias a calculation, he said. And Miss Hadley said he would be grateful for your attention, as though your attention were charity rather than recognition. And I stood in that corridor and understood that the test was not protecting me. It was preventing me from being the person who stood up and said what was true. And the cost of the disguise had become higher than the cost of the truth. She looked at the space on the bench between them. The minimum space, the precise boundary she had drawn. The chair. In the drawing room. The first evening. You saw me move the chair for Tobias. That was the moment, he said, that I realized I had been testing for the wrong thing. I need time, she said. I need to think about whether the defense cancels the deception or whether they are separate accounts that must be settled separately. She stood. She walked to the garden door. She paused with her hand on the latch, and she did not turn around, but she said, "The culvert repair. Was that part of the test?" "No," he said. By then, nothing was part of the test. By then, it was just you. She opened the door and walked through it, and she did not close it behind her. He sat on the stone bench and looked at the open door and thought about the fact that she had left it open, and Jessamine Ellsworth did not do anything without intention, and an open door was not a closed one, and the difference between them was the difference between finished and thinking, and Tobias had been right. The stone behind his breastbone had not moved. It had cracked. And through the crack, something was entering that he had not felt in 4 years, something that was fragile and persistent and utterly unwilling to be managed. She came to him on the final morning of the house party. He was in the walled garden. He had been returning to it each morning, sitting on the stone bench beneath the pear tree, because it was the last place she had been honest with him, and he had been honest with her. She came through the garden door, the one she had left open. She was wearing the dark amber dress from the first day. "Your Grace," she said. "Soren," he said. "Please." She did not use the name. Not yet. "I have been thinking," she said, "about chairs." He waited. "I moved the chair for your brother because he needed it, and because asking him if he needed it would have taken something from him that I was not willing to take. I did not calculate it. I moved it because the chair was there, and he was arriving, and the two facts required a response, and I provided one." She sat on the bench, not in the minimum space, close enough that their shoulders were near. "But here is what you missed, Your Grace. I am also who I am when I know people are watching. The chair and the fork and the culvert, those are not my secret self. Those are my only self. There is no version of me that performs differently for a title. Which means your test was built on an assumption about me that was never true. The assumption that you had a performed self and a real self," he said. "You assumed everyone had two versions, because the woman who deceived you had two versions. But some people only have one." He was quiet. The blackbird was not singing this morning, and the silence where it had been was noticeable. "You are right," he said. "The test was not about you. It was about her. It was about Lady Eloise, and the letter, and the sentence in the letter that I have never repeated to anyone." She waited. She did not ask. She gave him the space, The same space she always gave, the open room in which a person could choose honesty without being forced to it. She wrote that I was convenient, he said, that the title and the estate were considerable, and the man attached to them was manageable, and the combination was the best available option. She described me as an option, a manageable option. The sentence sat in the garden between them. It had been behind the stone for 4 years, and now it was outside, in the September air, and he could breathe around it for the first time. "I am sorry," she said, "that you read that, that you carried it. I built a wall around it. I called the wall a test. I called it every respectable name I could find for the act of refusing to trust another person because one person had been untrustworthy." He looked at her. "And then you moved a chair for my brother, and the wall developed a crack. And every day after that, the crack widened. And by the time I heard Mrs. Caldwell, the wall was already down, and I was standing in the rubble of it, trying to pretend it was still functional." She looked at the garden door, the one she had left open, the one she had walked through this morning to come back. "I came back," she said, "because the door was open, and because you told me the truth when I asked for it, even though the truth cost you everything you had built to protect yourself, and because when you defended Tobias, you did not defend him as a duke pulling rank, you defended him as a brother. And a brother's defense is not a performance, it is a reflex." She paused. The lie was wrong, the man was not. "Soren," she said. "His name. Given back to him. Not the title, not the boundary drawn with 2 words. His name, in her voice, in the garden where she had left the door open." "Jessamine," he said. She put her hand on the bench between them, flat and deliberate, palm down on the cold stone, in the space where the boundary had been. He covered it with his, and neither of them moved, and the September morning held still around them, and the door was open, and the wall was down, and the stone behind his breastbone was not a stone anymore. It was a space, and something was filling it that he was not going to name yet, but it was there, and it was hers, and she knew it. The house party ended that afternoon. Lady Penvale found Soren at the front door as his carriage was brought around. "She knew because she is who I told you she was," Lady Penvale said. "Accomplished, direct, and not easily managed. You are going to have to be worthy of that, Your Grace." She looked toward the garden, where Jessamine was walking with Tobias. "Your brother is fond of her." "My brother recognized what she was before I did." "Your brother," Lady Penvale said, "did not need a test. He simply paid attention." Jessamine saw him waiting. She said something to Tobias, and Tobias walked toward the house, and Jessamine walked toward the carriage, and she was not hurrying, and he did not expect her to. "Soren," she said. And then, for the first time, the smile itself, small and real and entirely unmanaged, the one she had been deciding against for 10 days, given now with the full intention of a woman who had decided for. "I will write to you," he said. "You may. And the replies will contain questions, and the questions will require honest answers, and the honest answers will not contain the phrase, 'certain affairs.'" "Agreed." "And you will visit Tobias's estate in Dorset, and I will visit Tobias's estate in Dorset, and at some point that is not this point, we will discuss what that means." He looked at her. "At some point." "At some point," she said. "I am not a woman who is managed into decisions, Soren. I arrive at them. And I arrive at them on my own schedule, which is efficient but not rushed. I have noticed," he said, "that your schedule produces excellent results." She extended her hand. He took it. The hand of a woman who moved chairs and set down forks and fixed culverts, and played Beethoven and had one self, one single self, and had given it to his brother and to a drainage ditch and to a stone bench in a walled garden without ever being asked and without ever performing. He held it for 1 moment longer than the formal register required. She allowed it for exactly that long. Then she withdrew it, and stepped back, and the almost smile was on her face again. But different now. Warmer, carrying in it the knowledge of what the smile itself looked like, and the promise that it would be given again, at a time of her choosing, on her schedule. "Good afternoon, Your Grace," she said. "Good afternoon, Miss Ellsworth." The carriage pulled away. Soren looked back once, and she was standing at the front steps, looking at the walled garden where the door was still open, and she was thinking, and the thinking was its own kind of promise. "Well," Tobias said. "Well," Soren agreed. Tobias looked at him with the patient, knowing expression of a younger brother who had been right about everything and was exercising considerable restraint about saying so. "The test," Tobias said. "The test is over." "And what was the result?" Soren looked out the window at the Somerset countryside passing in the September light. "The result," he said, "is that I was the one being tested, and I very nearly failed." Tobias said nothing. He did not need to. The carriage moved through the Somerset afternoon, and the two brothers sat in the particular silence of men who understood each other completely, and the stone behind Soren's breastbone was gone, and in its place was a space that was open and waiting, and that belonged, entirely and without qualification, to a woman who had moved a chair. The letters began in October and continued through the winter with the steady accumulation of two people building something by hand, one honest sentence at a time. She asked him about the estate. He answered without evasion. She asked him about the letter, the one from 4 years ago, the sentence he had never repeated. He wrote it down for her, the actual words, and sent them. And her reply arrived 2 days later and contained a single line. "You were never manageable. You were always the point. She was wrong about everything." He kept that letter in the desk drawer where he kept all her letters. There were 23 by Christmas. They met at Tobias's estate in Dorset in November, as she had proposed. The three of them walked the property in the late autumn light, and Jessamine and Tobias argued about the Southfield gradient for 20 minutes, while Soren stood at the boundary fence and watched two people he loved disagree with the productive friction of equals, and felt the open space in his chest fill a little further. She did not curtsy to him. She had never curtsied to him. She had met him as Mr. Cathmore, a man of no consequence, and the curtsy, the formal acknowledgement of rank, had never entered their vocabulary because their vocabulary had been built without it. He proposed in December, in a letter, because Jessamine valued precision and letters allowed precision. The letter said, "I came to Beresford Hall looking for someone who would be the same person with and without my title. I found you. You were the same person with everyone, in every room, in every field, in every silence. I do not deserve the consistency of your character, but I am asking to stand beside it for the rest of my life. If you will have me, I will spend the years earning what you gave my brother in an afternoon, the knowledge that I am seen, completely, by someone who does not require me to be anyone other than who I am." Her reply arrived the following morning, in her own hand, which was covered in numbers in the margins where she had been working on something else when his letter arrived and had set everything aside to answer it. It said, "Yes, and the drainage at Ashworth needs attention. I have seen the survey maps. We will discuss it when I arrive. J.E." He read this twice. He understood that this was her version of a love letter, a future expressed in shared work and honest letters, and the quiet assumption that they would be standing in the same fields arguing about the same gradients for the rest of their lives. They were married in the spring. Tobias stood beside him. Lady Penvale sat in the front pew with the expression of a woman collecting her favor in real time. Jessamine's father walked her to the front of the church, with the contained pride of a man who had built a fortune and raised a daughter, and considered the daughter the greater achievement by a considerable margin. She wore dark amber. She had not consulted anyone. She wore what she wore, the color that said who she was without apology or performance, And when she reached the front of the church, she looked at him with the expression that was not the almost smile, and was not the assessment, and was not the challenge. It was the smile, the full one, the one she had given at the carriage and had been holding in reserve since, waiting for the moment that deserved it. She did not curtsy. She had never curtsied to him. She would never curtsy to him. It was the absence that said everything. She had met him as a man before she knew he was a duke, and she had chosen the man, and the duke was incidental. She took his hand. "Soren," she said. "Jessamine," he said. And neither of them let go. The garden door at Beresford Hall was still open. Lady Penvale had not closed it. She had left it as it was. A door in a wall, in a garden, in a county that noticed things and discussed them at length, and occasionally, despite itself, found them genuinely beautiful. The best tests, Soren had written in his final letter before the wedding, are the ones that teach you something you did not know you needed to learn. I went to Beresford Hall to test your character. You tested mine. I arrived with a stone behind my breastbone and a wall around it and a title I was hiding and a wound I was managing. You moved a chair for my brother and the wall cracked. You set down a fork for my brother and the wall shifted. You played Beethoven for no one, and the wall came down. And when it was down, you walked through the rubble, and you looked at what was underneath. And you did not curtsy, and you did not perform, and you did not leave. You stayed. And that was the answer to a question I did not know I was asking.